it gives people a lot of anxiety when we think about all the possibilities of all over the world, all the different things that are happening, whether it's Ukraine and Russia, Iran and Israel. It's like, it's constant. What's going on in Gaza? It's like everything is, it's just like this constant feed of doom that, you know, if you're paying attention, and you kind of have to pay attention a little, because it is kind of crazy, and it could affect your life. Which is,
I think, why we're so quick to want to, glom on to what's happening with Epstein or what's happening with the intel assessment of them, because it takes away the focus from, there's shit happening in the world. They could create bigger conflict, right? It could drag us into something bigger. Look, the European Union they're heavily focused on what's going on with Russia because they're sitting on the border, right? And so, right now, Putin, he has no interest in peace, right? He thinks he's still kind of winning, right? And there's this hope that, we think the Russian economy is about to crumble. It doesn't look that way. I don't think it's going to crumble. So, but I mean, my point being is that the EU looks at it from a different perspective than the U.S. does. Now, I think one of the things that Trump's done very well is to get the EU to focus more of their own resources on this. That's a great move, right? And people should be able to say, whether they're Democrat or Republican, it makes sense. Focus more on it, right? It's in your backyard. And so I think that's a good step from this administration. They should be talking about it more. But does that mean we should back off entirely? Well, again, I hear from folks all the time, and they're like, why do we give a shit? Why should we be spending our resources on Ukraine? And fine, if you're okay with Putin winning, then fine, okay. Then I get your point. But at least admit that what you're saying is, we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine, and frankly, without U.S. support, Ukraine's not going to win this fight, and whatever that win means, right? The win.
Can they even win?
No, they can't. Not in terms of like we've reclaimed all our territory. That's never going to happen, right?
So it's over for
that. It's a negotiated settlement of some sort that's not completely unpalatable for the Ukrainian people, right? So what they're going to, who knows? Maybe the goal is clearly to get everything back, but they're not going to get Crimea back. They're not going to get, some of the eastern region that the Russians have been sitting in now for quite a long time, right? Even before the invasion. So, you've got some negotiated settlement that they can accept. But, if we say we're not going to support them, and you can't inflict enough pressure or whatever you want to call it, pain on Putin to get him in a serious way to the negotiating table, then ultimately, the Russian military will overwhelm them, right? Because they've got the support of China. They've got certainly the support of North Korea. North Korea's about to send another 30,000 troops to the front lines on behalf of Putin. I mean, that's crazy, but we've got North Korean troops by the thousands fighting and dying in Ukraine. And so, the U.S. providing military support that keeps them in the fight long enough to hopefully, with the EU expanding what they're doing, to hopefully get Putin to think, okay, fuck it, I do have to sit down at the table. Great.
Well, this is what's discouraging, is that Trump said, when I get into office, I can fix this in 24 hours.
Yeah. I know.
That seemed
messaging problem. Again,
crazy.
Messaging problem.
Yeah.
It's always, again, I go back to that same thing. There's always a problem with and again, this is not I'm just saying maybe get better, comms people, and try to get just a tad bit more discipline. But, the idea that you're going to fix this problem in a day, it's hyperbole, but people buy into it, right? And then you get a mob that are saying, well, how come we couldn't? And what are you doing here? And rather than saying, well, no more wars, just say the world is an unusual, unstable, chaotic place. There may be occasion when we need to be involved, but I'm going to try to minimize that. Say something like that, and then you don't have to throw more red meat to the crowd. But it's, the Ukraine situation, and Zelensky's got some other problems, right? It's an interesting situation that hopefully it doesn't bore people, but it's important to keep on the radar, is that, Zelensky has just signed a bill that kind of gutted the two primary anti-corruption organizations in Ukraine. And Ukraine's had years and years of history of being a corrupt nation. And it's always been a roadblock to them getting into the European Union, because they're saying, you've got to do something to clean this goddamn place up, right? So Ukraine has had a history of, not just with Zelensky, but prior to that. And so the parliament, wrote up a bill basically handing over control of these two anti-corruption independent organizations that monitor corruption inside the Ukraine government, handed over that control to the prosecutor general, government control of these organizations. And they put that bill that they wrote, a Zelensky supporter wrote it, put it on Zelensky's desk like 48 hours ago. And he had the choice to either sign it or veto it. Again, here's the problem. We think, like, who the fuck was advising him, right? Veto that goddamn thing. But he didn't. And he signed it. And now you got street protests, significant, large street protests in Ukraine against this because they considered this authoritarian takeover. And they know what their history was like, and so the people are worried about this. So they're out on the streets protesting. Putin's looking at it going like, it's fantastic. That's because Putin's been saying that Zelensky's an illegitimate leader for some time now. And one of his demands has always been, I'll negotiate, but, Zelensky needs to go. And because he wants a pro-Kremlin leader in there. So you've got all this going on, and then Zelensky decides he's going to sign this bill. Now he's got the protests. Now he's going to have to, he's trying to scramble. So now he said, well, we're going to introduce a new bill to strengthen our anti-corruption efforts. So now he's trying to, cauterize that wound. So, it's just, again, it's a self-inflicted wound. He shouldn't have done it, but I'm trying to speak to the complexity that's going on out there right now.
Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
Mike Baker.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, so that's, we touched very briefly. We haven't even talked about the situation with Hamas and Israel, but I'll leave that for another day because I'm sure if we got together again in another half a year, it's still going on. There's no ceasefire that's going to happen. Every time you turn around, the U.S., Witkoff or somebody in the U.S. administration or the Saudis or the Egyptians or the Qataris, whoever's handling mediation is saying, yeah, we're very close to a ceasefire. It's just not happening.